In this video, we're going to be looking at both legitimate and fallacious types of arguments that appeal to authority, personal traits, and consensus. Let's start with the argument from authority. Premise 1. Most of what authority X has to say on subject matter S is correct. X says P about S, therefore P is correct. What's going on here is that we're claiming because authority X usually says true things about the subject matter S, if X says P about S, X is probably saying something true, therefore we conclude that P is correct. Note that this is just a different sort of statistical syllogism. We have a claim that a large percentage of F's, things said by authority X on subject matter S, are G, correct. Then we've got a claim about a particular, in this case the particular is a claim, our particular P, and we've got the claim that it is an F because X says it about S, and therefore we conclude that this P is a G. So it's a type of statistical syllogism when understood this way. This type of reasoning is ubiquitous in things like magazine and newspaper articles, and in the news. Think about how often we accept claims because an authority has endorsed the claim. Particularly if you're reading an article in which different experts, professors, etc. are cited, we don't usually question the claims about the things they endorse. The grounds on which we accept what they say is because they are an authority. But you may notice we don't get a claim like this made very often, if ever. That's because usually this first premise is suppressed. It remains unstated. It's an implicit premise. It's just assumed to be part of the background knowledge that if someone's an authority on S, the things they're usually going to say about things related to subject matter S are going to be correct. So usually all we get explicitly stated is that the authority says something, and on those grounds we're supposed to accept that as true. Arguments from authority are legitimate when the authority really is likely to be right about the matter at hand. That being said, because these arguments are inductive, they can be false. After all, even experts can make mistakes in their area of expertise. The fallacy of appeal to authority occurs either, 1, when the alleged authority lacks expertise in the area of concern. So, for example, if an expert in chemistry starts making predictions about penny stocks, those claims aren't ones you necessarily need to accept because this person's an expert in chemistry, not practical economics. Or, the experts in a given area disagree with one another on the matter at hand. So let's say you get a bunch of experts in psychology, or a specific area of psychology, like industrial organizational psychology. If about half of the experts think X and the other half think not X, just the information that an expert alone accepts X isn't sufficient reason to accept the claim because the authorities, the experts, are divided on the matter. So in short, when you see an appeal to authority, just ask yourself, is this authority speaking in their proper domain of expertise? And does there seem to be agreement amongst authorities? If the answers to both those questions are yes, then the appeal to authority is successful, and you ought to count that, the opinion of the authority, in favor of the position that they're advocating. If not, you might have a fallacy of an appeal to authority. Okay, the next type of argument we're going to look at are arguments against the person, also known by their Latin name, argumentum ad hominem. These are the inverse of arguments from authority. Arguments against the person conclude that a statement is false because it is made by a particular person or groups of persons. So in the case of an argument from authority, we assumed if someone said it, it was true. And in the case of arguments against the person, if someone says it, we assume it's false. Such arguments are rarely ever legitimate. They are legitimate only when there is a good reason to believe that most of the claims made by the individual or group on a particular aspect of that subject matter are false. And that just doesn't happen that often. But there are cases. Think about a pathological liar. or someone with an all-encompassing worldview so off that most of what they think about certain subject matters is false. Maybe a cult leader would be a good example. The form of an argument against the person is as follows. Premise 1, most of what individual X has to say on subject matter S is false. Premise 2, X says P about S. Conclusion, P is false. Notice that this also is a statistical syllogism, although usually if you run across an argument against the person, this first premise will be suppressed, like it was in the case of the argument from authority. Most of the time, when an argument is made against the person, it is a fallacious ad hominem. In fact, good arguments against the person are so rare that usually this fallacy is just referred to simply as an ad hominem. There are psychological reasons why we are prone to accept ad hominems, including dislike of the person making an argument or dislike of the argument a person is making. Ad hominems sometimes consist merely in attacks on one's character. These are called abusive ad hominems, or the very common "you too" sort of manner. For example, "You can't tell me I should exercise more. You hardly ever exercise yourself." While it may be a little hypocritical of the person who doesn't exercise very often to tell you to exercise more, that doesn't mean what they're saying isn't true. The last type of argument we're going to look at is arguments from consensus. In an argument from consensus, some assertion is held to be correct on the grounds that most people believe it, or alternatively is held to be incorrect because most people reject it. Like the arguments from authority and against the person, the argument from consensus can be expressed as the statistical syllogism. Here, the statistical generalization is this. Usually, when most people agree on a statement about a subject matter S, the statement is true. This is followed up with a second premise about P, a particular statement, that most people agree on it, and then the conclusion is that P is true. An important question in addressing the legitimacy of an argument from consensus is to ask, on what topics is consensus an authority? Background knowledge is essential to know whether the subject matter is understood by enough people in the group being polled for an argument from consensus to work. So, for example, most graduates of New York high schools know that the state capital is Albany. If a large group of New York high school grads were asked about the state capital, the consensus would probably be the correct answer. Most of them would probably say Albany. But consensus of the same group on the capital of New Mexico or of Slovenia, that wouldn't be so reliable. So unless consensus is a reliable authority on a subject matter, an appeal to consensus is fallacious. So in all the cases, whether it's an argument from authority, an argument against the person, or an appeal to consensus, unless the major statistical premise is going to be true, then the argument is fallacious. So that's just something to look out for when you're reading stuff. If a claim is made by an authority or against a person, assess and see whether or not that's warranted.